So, I welcome you all to the fourth session of Science of Yoga lecture series brought to you by IKS Division IIT Roorkee in association with IKS Division, Ministry of Education, Government of India. I now invite Professor Anil Kumar Gaurishetty, the convener of...
Can we start?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
So, I now invite Professor Anil Kumar Gaurishetty, the convener of IKS Division, IKS Committee, IIT Roorkee, to address the gathering.
Dhanyavadaha, Mrudulah. Namaste, Edwin Bryant Ji. It's really
Namaste Ji. Namaste.
It's really a pleasure to have you here as part of this Science of Yoga lecture series.
And it's my pleasure. It's my privilege. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and though my background is in nuclear physics, and Soham Mahodaya's background is in electrical engineering, and Gante Murthy Mahodaya's background is in agriculture. So we all are here to enjoy the Indian knowledge systems by trying to understand the knowledge embedded in it. As Soham Mahodaya told initially, when the Minister of Education has established this IKS division at the ministry level, it has been trying seriously to support and promote students and young faculty members across India. And many students and young faculty members came forward in terms of institute internship schemes and research proposals. And at IIT Roorkee as well, the committee constituted by our director has asked many faculty members to come together and try to do some events so that the students and faculty members can get motivated. As part of that, we thought of this Science of Yoga lecture series. And we are located at the foothills of Himalayas, Uttarakhand state, which is also called as Deva Bhumi. And it is very well known for yoga, Ayurveda, and spirituality. And I'm sure in today's lecture, the thought that you're going to share will be really interesting and motivating for the audience. And I take this opportunity to thank Gante Murthy Mahodaya for supporting this activity. And so over to you, Soham Mahodaya. Thank you, Mahodaya. Namaste.
Now I will officially begin the program by playing an invocation video.
आदिनाथाय नमोऽस्तु तस्मै येनोपदिष्टा हठयोगविद्या विद्याजते राजयोगम् आरोग्योरधिको भूति चित्तस्य पदेन वाचा मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोक्तं प्रवरं मुनिना पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि अथ पातञ्जलयोगसारसूत्राणि अथ योगानुशासनानि योगश्चित्तवृत्तिनिरोधः तदा द्रष्टुतरुणे स्थानम् अभ्यासवैराग्याभ्यामतन्निरोधः यमनियमासन प्राणायाम प्रत्याहार धारणा ध्यान समाधयोष्टभङ्गानि त्रयमेकत्र संयमः पुरुषार्थशून्यानां गुणानां प्रतिप्रसवः कैवल्यं स्वरूप प्रतिष्ठा वाक्चितिशक्तिः
We are honored to have here Professor Ganti Murthy, National Coordinator of IKS Division, Ministry of Education, Government of India, in our session today. I request him to please address the gathering with his words of wisdom and encouragement.
सर्वेभ्यः मातृभ्यो नमः पितृभ्यो नमः गुरुभ्यो नमः सभायै नमः सभापतिभ्यश्च नमो नमः. A very warm welcome and namaskara to all of you, and this is indeed a great pleasure to see the yoga series being run at the IIT Roorkee, and we are very happy that IKS division is part of this. And these lectures by all the stalwarts talking about the various aspects of yoga are going to be something that is going to be very useful for a lot of our youth, because in these days of where the chitta vrittis are going in all directions, the chitta vritti nirodha is going to be very useful for this, not only for youth but all people across the world. And I think this is something that we need to really take forward, and I think this is such a great idea to take it out, especially in the higher educational institutions, because this is something that again will reach the youth in a much more effective way. And great to see stalwarts coming into all these programs, and I have sorry missed the first few ones, and I'm glad I could be here today. And I'm looking forward to listen to Dr. Edwin Bryant, and this will be my honor to listen to it and listen to your lecture. And I think I'll stop there, and I will, without any further ado, I'll stop here, and then wish you all a happy learning, and we hope we'll go forward with this. Namaste. Thank you.
Som sir, you are muted.
Sorry. So I was thanking Ganti Murthy ji for his kind words and his encouragement to our activities. And it is our honor to have you here with us. Now I officially welcome and introduce our esteemed speaker for the day. So our speaker is Professor Edwin Bryant. He has received his PhD in Indic languages and cultures from Columbia University. He taught Hinduism at Harvard University for 3 years and is presently the professor of Hinduism at Rutgers University in USA, where he teaches courses on Hindu philosophy and religion. He has published 8 books and authored a number of articles on the earliest origins of the Vedic culture, yoga philosophy, and the Krishna tradition. Edwin strives to combine academic scholarship and rigor with appreciation towards traditional knowledge systems. His teaching method is to allow the ancient texts to speak in their own voice and through their own terms and categories. In addition to his academic course load, Edwin currently teaches weekend workshops on the Yoga Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, and Hindu philosophy at yoga studios and teacher training courses. Edwin's translation and commentary on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is specifically dedicated to contributing to the growing body of literature on yoga by providing insights from the major pre-modern commentaries on the text with a view to grounding the teachings in their traditional context. We are immensely honored to have a prolific author of Vedic culture and philosophy, and as a Science of Yoga lecture series we are organizing, we are extremely happy that one of the most well-known commentators and translators of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which is the defining text on yoga, which we all have with us and referred that text also in our various teachings and discussions. So we are extremely happy to have him with us. And now all over to Professor Edwin Bryant. Please share your wisdom and your insights on this topic. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Soham. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Umilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate. Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye. Always nice to begin with an invocation to remember that help us put aside our egos and remind us that we're handing down traditions that are many centuries, millennia old, that are handed down by great rishis, great yogis, and our own gurus, ultimately Ishvara behind everything. So good to remember that. The Indian knowledge systems are, of course, descending. They're handed down because they claim to be dealing with eternal truths. The Atman, Bhagavan, these are not truths that are context dependent or time or place or geography dependent. They're absolute eternal truths. So they're handed down. Of course, each generation of commentators has to bring them into dialogue with the modern with the context of the commentators. That's what the commentators do. The Bhashakas, they write their commentaries. They're not changing anything. They in their minds, they're expanding on the old. Originally, of course, everybody would consider the Vedic traditions or have their roots in the Upanishads, the Vedanta. And the commentators just preserve those truths, they perpetuate them, they hand them down and bring them into conversation with their particular moment, whatever that moment might be. Of course, now we're in the 21st century. Yoga has now been exported all over the world, and so therefore our intellectual landscape is very different from maybe Vyasa's in the 3rd century or Vachaspati Mishra, but they had their intellectual landscape. Perhaps their Purva Pakshas, perhaps their Purva Pakshas with the Buddhists, or whatever it might have been. So it's very enlivening for me to see that that the government of India has taken an interest in the perpetuation, and Murthy Ji, very nice that you're involved. I offer you my namaha, and I encourage you to use your adhikara to provide resources for these kinds of things, especially for the youth of India, because now, of course, there are tens of millions of people all over the world doing something which they call yoga. Although as scholars, we might prefer to call it modern postural yoga, because it's really dealing with the asana. But that's a story perhaps we can touch on. What I thought we would do today, of course, we all know, we're familiar with the Yoga Sutras, but the nature of svadhyaya is that you never tire of it. It's not that you think, oh, I've read the Gita, I don't need to read it anymore. I've read the Yoga Sutras, I don't need to go over this again. Anybody who says something like that does not have a real understanding of svadhyaya. Svadhyaya is something you do again and again and again and again. And each time, of course, svadhyaya meaning the study of sacred text, each time one goes deeper and deeper into the meanings of the sutras. So why don't we just maybe say a few things. We don't really know anything about Patanjali. Of course, we have that verse that you recited. I think it appears in the commentary of Bhojaraj, if I'm not mistaken. I forget when that might be, 10th century, maybe 10th century Bhojaraj. He was the king, maybe, I forget the date, but he was a great patron, great yogi, patron of the arts. I believe the invocation, Yogena Chitasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Chavaidyakena Yo Apakarot Tam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjali Anatosmi. So that invocation identifies Patanjali as being, Pravaram Muninam, the best of the Munis. Why the best? Because he apakarot, he took away 3 malas, 3 ills. Ultimately, the purpose of all these traditions is to relieve suffering, dukkam. So all of the knowledge systems coming down from, in their different ways, Sankhya with an understanding of, the difference between Purusha and Prakriti, the Vyakta, Avyakta, and the Purusha, that through Viveka, one can remove suffering. Yoga's way, of course, is Chittavritti Nirodha, to still the mind. And there are different ways. The goal of all of these sutras, to Dharma sutras, is to regulate human society in such a way that suffering is minimized, that there is interaction between people in the smoothest possible way. So in the minds of the great rishis, the sages that perpetuate these traditions, the goal is to alleviate human suffering, and yoga is probably the most radical. And let's consider why. Can we just scroll down a little bit to the first sutra? Oh, do I have control over this? It doesn't appear that I have control over scrolling down.
No, you will not have. Mridul will assist in that. So,
Mridu, could you just bring it down, please? Down, about a neck. Keep going. Going. There we are. Okay. So let's just look. So this is the So we talk about yoga. This is the text that has, that is best known for classical yoga. Everybody accepts it. Vedanta will go on, and in the second pada, it will debate the other schools, and it has problems with Sankhya. Vedanta has problems with Sankhya. At least there were different forms of Sankhya, but the one that was known to Vedanta was the Nastika Sankhya, which it's not clear that it was really Nastika. It just doesn't mention Ishvara. And so Vedanta is not happy with this. Is not happy with this just saying that Prakriti is the cause of everything, right? So Vedanta wants to say Janmadhyasya yataha, that Brahman is the cause, and Ikshater, Sutra number 5, it's intelligent. So for Vedanta, there has to be an intelligent cause behind the stirring of Prakriti. Otherwise, why would Prakriti stir? What would make the 3 gunas at the end of the yugas, at the end of the great cycles, when everything goes back into the avyakta and the Purusha is in some kind of a state of hibernation? What activates the gunas? It says Vedanta, after 14 billion years or whatever billion years in between the cycles, what is it that kickstarts the gunas? There has to be what Aristotle would have called a prime mover. And so therefore, so that's one of the main arguments that Vedanta directs against Sankhya, that there must be an Ishvara. But then it has two verses about yoga. It says, well, actually the complaint against yoga from Vedanta is that, okay, they accept an Ishvara, so they're happy about that. But their complaint, the little complaint, is a small complaint. And they say, well, for yoga, the Ishvara is only the efficient cause, not the material cause. And Vedanta, of course, Janmadhyasya yataha, wants Brahman to be both the efficient and the material cause. That's a very small little quibble. But other than that, full respect for yoga in Vedanta, and an acknowledgement that, okay, we're teaching about Brahman and Atman, but if you want to experience these things, you do yoga. And he calls it the systems of Yaman. And so therefore, yoga is accepted with maybe a little quibble here and there on some metaphysical issue. Same with Nyaya. Nyaya has of course, its own metaphysics, its padarthas, but at the end, I believe it's chapter 4, somewhere there, there is an acknowledgement. Okay, but that system with the yamas and the niyamas, that system of yoga, that's the way to experience these things. So all of which is to say that in the general Indian intellectual world, the different systems had their different focuses, and they did debate, and they did disagree, but not on everything. They only disagreed on specific things that an opposing school they had a different opinion upon, and they would debate on those particular things. But everybody, here's the point, everybody accepted yoga as the means to experience these truths of Vedanta, to have an experience of the of the innermost self. So let's have a so why would they say that? So let's have a look at how yoga presents itself. You notice it's not very, there's not a great deal of metaphysics here, because Sankhya is already dealing with that. Why does yoga need to deal with that? Sankhya is dealing with the metaphysics. There's no talk of, the word Brahman is not mentioned. Students often say, well, what's the relationship between Atman and Brahman? Of course, that's a Vedanta issue. That's an issue that Vedanta divides into the various traditions of Advaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Dvaita, and so on, Achintya Bheda, Shuddha Dvaita. All these traditions are taking different views on this relationship of Atman and Brahman, but that's not of concern to Patanjali. That's not of concern. His concern is an actual experience of the self. So right in the beginning, Artha Yoga Anushasanam sets out what he's doing, like all the sutras do. Vedanta starts off with Tatta Brahma Jignasa. So now there's going to be the Anushasanam, the continuing. Now then, of course, the question's raised, well, it's continuing from what? And the tradition, the commentarial tradition associates the origins of yoga with Hiranyagarbha. And there apparently was a Hiranyagarbha Samhita that becomes lost. And then, but the contents of it seem to have been preserved in I think it's a text called the Shashti Tantra. It doesn't matter. We don't need to get all technical about this. But it's interesting that the first yogi, according to the commentaries, is Brahma, the creator, the sort of what I like to call the engineer, so we don't confuse him with Vishnu or Shiva, who are the great Ishwaras. Brahma, of course, is a jiva. He is bound by karma. So he, the person with the best karma in the previous cycle becomes Brahma in the next cycle. And Brahma comes to consciousness on top of the lotus coming from the navel of Vishnu. And there's darkness. And can you imagine coming into consciousness after so many billion years, dormancy? And there's no, you can't see anything, you can't hear anything. I mean, there's just silence, there's darkness. I mean, he could feel, I suppose he could feel he was sitting on something, and he's having this existential crisis. Who am I? I mean, he couldn't, if you can't see anything, you don't even have a sense of what kind of reality there is out there. If you think of generally when babies are born, there's kind of sounds and sights, and of course the mother is cooing and being affectionate and caressing, and imagine coming to consciousness with none of that. And so the story goes, the first yogi, Brahma, tries to climb down the lotus to see, well, what is the cause? Who is my cause? What is who am I? Where am I from? What is anything? I can't imagine a more terrifying way of starting a new life. Obviously, the samskaras of the old lives are all covered by tamas, so memory is not functioning, and not, so he tries to climb down, and he doesn't reach the bottom because, of course, the message is you cannot just get to Vishnu by your own power. By climbing, how can you get to God? God only through bhakti, as we know from the Gita, right? Bhakta bhaktya tvananyaya shakya hameva vidu arjuna, says Krishna. So down he tries to go, of course, an absolute failure, comes back up and sits on the top of the lotus, and perhaps you've seen some pictures of this, and then he hears the word tapaha. And of course you could say, well, how did he understand what it meant? So no one had taught him language, so we would have to, this is the kind of question you have to make an inference. Well, my inference would be that it activated his knowledge of the phonemes from his past life. Somehow or other they were activated, and he understood that he had to do tapas, in order to understand anything, and certainly in order to achieve Vishnu. And so he did. And the tapas was he chitta vritti nirodha, he stilled his mind completely. He understood my mind is useless, it's limited, it can only function in the realm of prakriti. Chitta is a material thing. It is a reservoir of samskaras. So it receives samskaras through the senses. They're lodged in the chitta, and then And then the only thing the chitta can know is it can only know what resources it has within itself in the form of samskaras, and you can put those together in creative ways, to be sure. But you can't the mind cannot produce anything unless it has the samskara lodged within it, and all those samskaras are prakritic. So they're no use in understanding Bhagavan, who is non-prakritic, is a non-prakritic being. So understanding this, Brahma followed the instruction, and he realized my mind is of no use to me in this great existential dilemma that I find myself in. And so he was the first yogi in the sense that we find here in Sutra number 2, right? What is this, right? The Sutra number 1 that Patanjali says, Anushasanam is going to continue. Anu is a prefix, an upasarga in Sanskrit that you can put on any verb. You could say anugamanam or anukadanam, to continue eating or walking. And here he's continuing the teaching. So question presents itself. Well, he's continuing it from what? And the tradition would say that it's handed down by the rishis, and the original, the first yogi was Brahma. And what does that mean? He was the first yogi. He was the first one to do yoga. And what does it mean? What does yoga mean? Well, according to Patanjali, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. There's a typo here. That should be a visarga at the end. I beg your pardon. It should be an H with a dot at the end of nirodha. So yoga is the nirodha, which comes from nirud, which is the stilling. The stilling of all, of what? Of all vrittis. Vritti is to revolve, vrit. If you think of thinking, it sort of emerges, a thought emerges from the mind. Okay, so let's just, before we finish that sentence, so the chitta then is the mind. It's basically just, it's a reservoir. It's an alaya, or an ashaya. It's a reservoir within which samskaras are lodged. A samskara is an imprint. Every time the senses, any of the 5 senses, contacts an object of the sense, it leaves an imprint. So these words, for example, will be leaving an imprint on our minds, the sight of the TV screen, leaving an imprint, or any sounds, sights, etc. And those imprints are also carried over from eternally, from life after life. So the chitta is simply a container, if you will, in and of itself. And when some of those imprints are activated, they become a thought, which is a vritti. And so the thoughts are nothing other than, there's no magic, nothing is magic. Not even the siddhis are magic, my friends. They're all physics or subtle physics. That's why, I'm hoping, so especially from India, because now our Purva Paksha nowadays are the physicists and modern psychology. These are the conversations that the yogis, the modern yogis, have to have. In the past, their Purva Pakshas were, as I said, the Bodhas or the Charvakas or the Lokayatas or various different kinds of intellectual opponents or let's say interlocutors. So nowadays, it is the psychologists and the physicists. And so I'm really hoping that, if more and more, and India, of course, has so many excellent students, such incredible brain power. A lot of it runs away to the west. Hopefully, India will be able to keep more and more of its intellectual resources. And Indians, of course, automatically have a emotional, cultural relationship with their traditions. And so, therefore, what does that mean? That means they're more open-minded. They were more a priori disposed to considering creating conversations between these ancient knowledge systems and modern knowledge systems. We have to do the same thing as predecessors, Vedantins, did. And the Vedanta Sutra, the second chapter is an entire chapter is engaging with other points of view. This is part of the Indian intellectual tradition. They never ran away from opponents. No, that's how Indian thought. It's cross-fertilized. And was on the Bhashya themselves, the commentaries themselves introduced the opposing point of view. So intellectually very, not just honest, but rigorous. If your position is right, what fear do you have from any other position? So you say, well, the Bodhas say this, the Jains say that, and Sankhya says this. Well, we accept Sankhya in this regard, but we don't accept it in that regard. And you engage the opponents, and usually quite fairly. Usually it's quite fair. Because, if you're writing about your opponent, there's nothing stopping you misrepresenting your opponent. But generally, at least the bhashas that I've studied, occasionally something seems to be misrepresented. But again, you also have to keep in mind, they didn't have the access to information we have. You can go on Wiki and type in anything. You can download the Sankhya Karikas. You can download the various commentaries on yoga. Well, they couldn't do it back then. They had to find parchment copies. You're a Brahmana sitting in a village. What access do you have to the entire wealth of the Indian tradition? You have some, but sometimes I think about this and I think, my goodness, some of these medieval 16th century, I'm especially familiar with the Vrindavan traditions, the Braj traditions, and the Goswamis, the Vrindavan Goswamis, and their erudition is just astonishing. Of course, there would be kings who had their, parchments, and they would, engage Brahmins to write, but still, they didn't have the same access to material, at least not the same ease of access to material that we have. So back to the point I'm making then is now our Purva Pakshas are modern physics, modern biology, neuroscience, and so my great hope is that students of India and the professors and intellectual and academics of India who are so well trained in these Western sciences do not close the door on their own intellectual traditions, which have much to offer the world. Especially, we were just talking the other day, the notion of desire as the enemy. Kamesha, Krodesha, Rajaguna, Samudbhavaha, all of these traditions. Vairagya, right in the beginning of the Yoga Sutras. Vairagya, how do you nirodha, how do you still the mind? Vairagya means without vairaga, without desire. All of these traditions, the first noble truth of Buddhism, freedom of desire. Desire is the enemy. And we look around our planet, my friends, and we see the mess that we've made with our uncontrolled desires. These environmental problems are all coming from excessive consumption. So if someone is to say, well, what is the use of yoga? Well, other than your own personal meditation, well, how is that helping the world? Other than your own personal, asana practice, how is that helping the world? Well, my friends, the number one problem facing the world is unconstrained desire. And all of these traditions, except for Mimamsa. Mimamsa is a bit an exception here, but even Mimamsa, which is all about desire, you have to have desire, but even Mimamsa, your desire has to be controlled by Dharma. It's not just crazy wild desire. So they have a place for desire, but the other moksha traditions, certainly all the moksha traditions, Buddhism, Jainism included, desire is the enemy of the, it's detrimental to the individual. It's never satisfied. Krishna says it's like fire. The more you try to fulfill, the more it burns. So it's never, so it creates dissatisfaction. Asatyam kutaha sukha, kutaha sukham, says Krishna. Ashantir, if your mind isn't peaceful, kutaha sukham, where's happiness then? So these traditions have obviously so much to offer individually, but also in terms of our, the challenges we face as a planet right now, with this massive, and it's a little discouraging to see India is chasing down this consumer, it's becoming a great consumer culture in its own right, and when it has so many, it has the richness of these traditions which are warning. The sages of India has warned repeatedly through these centuries and millennia that desire can only be destructive unless it's regulated for the non-yogis, for those who do not wish to seek moksha. Then it's heavily regulated by dharma. So the teachings so yoga then is about chittavritti nirodha. It's the stilling, right? Nirodha is a nirud, Sanskrit root. All of the thoughts of the mind, all of them. And then why would anybody wish to do that? what would be the result of that? Tada kim bhavati? What happens then? Drashtu swarupe avasthanam. Then this is a word for the Atman. It's in the genitive singular. It's really the drashtra. There's many words for the, you're all familiar with the word Atman. And of course, Purusha is a term that Sankhya likes. Atman tends to be used by Vedanta a lot. Gita uses both of them. And that is ultimately who we are, my friends, in our innermost core. We are, this is who we are. We're not the bodies. We're not this is Vidya. Vidya is to know who we are. Viveka. And that, of course, Vedanta is trying to teach us that. The Upanishads is trying to teach us that from the beginning. We are the Atman. But because of avidya, we think we're the body-mind. So we run around trying to find happiness through body-mind. And then civilization that's built on the happiness of body-mind is a consumer culture, my friends. It's a consumer culture. Chasing after, if you think about it, you know, what are our economic systems? They're capitalism. What is capitalism? It's the production. It's production. And a healthy economy is one that produces. Well, if you produce, what do you need? Well, you need markets. And to have markets, what do you need? You need to create desires where they weren't even there in the first place. So the consumer culture is the opposite of the yoga culture. Yoga culture is about simple living and vairagya and looking for the peace and the happiness within. And such rich traditions, which are now, of course, being exported to the West, now mostly. But let's just finish up the first four verses, and then we say a little something about in the West. So what happens if chitta vritti nirodha? Okay, this is stilling of the mind. Then what happens? When the mind is out of the way, the world is being closed down, right? Pratyahara, the fifth limb of yoga. And then gradually dharana, mind is stilled. Then dhyana, more deeply stilled. And finally, the various stages of samadhi. What happens? Swarupa, its own essence. Rupa is a form, nature, essence. Then literally there is the situatedness in its own nature of the seer. We would, in English, of course, we wouldn't, grammatically, we wouldn't put it like that, but the Sanskrit literally is then of the seer in its own nature, the situatedness, the state of being situated. So to put that in English, we would have to say, then the seer can abide in its own nature. And this is the goal of the great yogis in your great literatures, your Mahabharata. And I say yours, we shouldn't say any. That's a hankara. To think I'm Hindu, I'm American. This is avidya, my friends. Anyone who said this is Indian, it's avidya. What's Indian about it? Atman is not Indian. We can't say this is Indian. Then what? Gujarati or what? I mean, come on. This is the first thing that the rishis are trying to get us to understand is that we're not the body. If we're not the body, we're not the culture either. Some cultures are more supportive of yoga, of course, and we do namaha. We can do namaha to the cultures that are supportive of yoga, but we cannot say it is Indian. Is the Atman Indian? Is consciousness Indian? Or does or is the very first teaching that consciousness, anything that is alive, it has a consciousness? Then it's not Indian, is it? So what I think was very finely, developed by the great Indian thinkers was the mechanism of chitta vritti nirodha. You don't find that so much. You don't find that, in Plato, with maybe some exceptions among some early Greeks. And of course, there were great Christian mystics, but this sort of, to this depth of sophistication and analysis of the mechanism of realizing who we really are, we could say, okay, that certainly developed in India. And so therefore we are very grateful to the great sages of India, but don't think, but the goal of moksha is not an Indian goal. It's a goal for any embodied being, anyone in a body. So of course now, so let's just finish this up. So then the goal of yoga is to still the mind, which is where you find culture and personality and language and all of those things we might consider to be Hindu or American or British or anything else. Get all that out of the way. That's just ahankara. That's asmita, Patanjali prefers to call it, which is the wrong kind of ego. It's avidya asmita. The real ego is brahmasmi. Brahmasmi, not Hindu asmi, not American asmi, not even yogi asmi. It's Brahmasmi. There's the great Mahavakya that I am Brahman. So so therefore that's the goal of yoga. It's not a belief. It's not a, I wouldn't even call it a philosophy. You know, Sankhya provides the philosophy, the metaphysics. It's a method. It's a mechanism. And just just finish this up, and then we'll go back to verse 3. And if the consciousness is not absorbed in its own nature, my friends, then itaratra, otherwise vritti sarupyam. It's absorbed in the minds, in the vritti, and that's us. We're in a state of avidya. We're trapped in our minds, our thoughts, our egos, our desires, our aversions, and we're never peaceful, and we're never satisfied. There's always something missing, and the years go by, and the hair gets white, and the sages tell us, before you die, at least before you die, try to, you know, develop a deeper relationship with these traditions. Try to fix the mind in the various ways that yoga is our topic for today, but of course bhakti has its own ways of fixing the mind on Bhagavan and so forth. So so because of sort of historical circumstances, a lot to do with the Maharaj of Mysore and the great Krishna Acharya, and to some extent Hindu you know, independence movement, a certain amount of attention was focused on asana as an alternative to, you know, British gymnastics, and a sort of a kind of a symbol of Hindu resistance to the colonial power. And so Krishnamacharya was very, very much sort of central to this. And you don't really have any texts on asana. There's the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, but that's a bit of a strange text, my friends. It's actually a left-handed tantra text. You know, the asanas are in chapter 2, and you know, it's been sort of extracted from obscurity because at least it has 33 asanas. But conveniently, chapter 3 is forgotten, where you have some very explicit left-handed tantric techniques. So, you know, you have the Giranda Samhita, 102 texts that I believe it was Krishnamacharya kind of plucked out to give some support to this massive emphasis on asana. And of course, his great disciples, Guruji Iyengar and Patabi Joyce and Desikachara, and elsewhere you had Shivananda as well, who also focused by no means as precisely and attentively as Krishnamacharya, but Shivananda also with his disciples Vishnu Devananda and Satchidananda. Through these disciples then, so they were developing these asanas, to a great extent associated with kind of Hindu nationalist resistance to British gymnastic physical culture. It doesn't matter. Whatever the reason, these are the quirks of fate. Perhaps Bhagavan is behind it all. And these great teachers then were sent to the West. And in the 60s, of course, Vivekananda was the first, but he wasn't so much interested in asana. And the great teachers came in the counterculture. It just seems like a perfect moment. On the one hand, you had this in India, you had this, you know, Hindu nationalism was reaching its peak and confidence. And in the West, you had this young people were not interested in the life of their parents, maybe working in a bank, 9 to 5, and the conventional American lifestyle. They were seeking higher truths, higher meanings. And this perfect combination of events in the 60s, the gurus came over, the great Bhaktivedanta Swami with the Hare Krishna movement. I first encountered my own experiences of Indian philosophy were through the great Bhaktivedanta Swami. I'm eternally indebted. I didn't meet him personally, but his books in the late 60s opened up my own relationship with yoga and bhakti, and other great teachers, including Guruji Iyengar, Patabi Joyce, which is more relevant to our story because they brought over asana. And they also brought over the Yoga Sutras, which is not very much read in India prior, before that. The last great commentary was Hariharananda. It's true, he was the last Sankhya-charya. But before that, there was the Vijnana Bhikshu in the 16th century. So there wasn't much attention to being paid in the 19th, 20th century to the Yoga Shastra. It was mostly Vedanta. and Nyaya, of course, was developing richly in Navadvip and Navya Nyaya. And Vaisheshika had kind of merged with Nyaya. Mimamsa, there was a certain amount of Mimamsa study, but almost nothing actually on Sankhya and Yoga. So, but the reason that the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali becomes exported to the West is because it has 3 verses on asana. And if you're a traditional Brahmana like Krishnamacharya was, or a traditional Vaidika Hindu, you can't just make things up. By definition, traditional means you have to find some link to tradition. And so there isn't much in literature on asana. It's mentioned, of course. Krishna mentions it in the Gita, but it's just a seat. There's no body of literature that speaks of hundreds of asana. Like I said, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika has 33, but it was a very obscure text. It's no one in India has heard of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika unless they happen to be, particularly learned. So the Yoga Sutra, then, everybody is a pan-Indian text. It's north, south, west, east. The sutras, the epics, the itihasas, the Puranas, the Veda, Upanishad. These are accepted by all the different communities that we might call, well, nowadays we call Hindu, but more accurately we should be saying the Vedic cultures. So the Yoga Sutra then comes to the West. And frankly, my friends, there's more people reading it in the West than in India. Because in the West, for various reasons. First, because the gurus brought it and wrote their commentaries. Guruji Iyengar wrote his commentary. Again, because it is kind of the canonical text for the asana, the practice of asana. But also it's not very threatening. The Gita is a little bit threatening if someone's a Christian and Krishna says, well, I'm the father. I'm the father of all living entities. Maheshwaram. Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. So again and again, Param Brahman, Param Dhamam, Pavitram Parama. I am the Supreme Being, Purusham, Uttamam, right? So that could be a little bit challenging, especially when then people, maybe read a little bit about Krishna and then the gopis, and then it's hard to understand that unless you understand Braj Bhakti. But imagine someone not really someone just, let's say, coming from a Christian culture, and there's Krishna. You can read the accounts in the colonial period. It was very hard for colonial folks to understand, Vaishnavism and Shaivism and Bhakti, right? Because Bhakti is, you have to have a Bhagavan for Bhakti. And who's Bhagavan? Well, it's Shiva, and it's Vishnu, and it's Krishna, and of course, Vishnu with 4 arms. Well, that seems a little, to someone not familiar, is a very strange idea of God. So therefore, Bhakti wasn't, of course, Bhaktivedanta Swami was the first one to really, really plant the seeds of Bhakti in the West, and then the Muktananda Swami to some extent with Kashmir Shaivism. But the Yoga Sutra doesn't have any of that. And therefore, in some ways, it just has consciousness. There's nothing, it's quite secular, in fact. At least in its metaphysics, there's consciousness and there's world of matter. So that's easy to understand that. Science hasn't found what the source of consciousness. So it's perfectly reasonable to suppose it's some other kind of entity called an Atman, or called whatever you want to call it. And so the Yoga Sutras also is less threatening metaphysically to a Western sort of orientation. So along with the asanas comes the Yoga Sutra. Actually, Krishna says in the Gita, out of thousands of people, Manushyanam Sahasresu Kaschid Yatati Siddhanam, out of thousands, only one is going to be interested anyway. And out of thousands who are interested, Yatatam Api Siddhanam Kaschid Mam Veti Tattvata, only very few, only one out of thousands of those already interested, only one knows Bhagavan. So bhakti is even more, it's even more real bhakti. Not just going to mandir and with a shopping list. Bhagavan, yedo, yededo, odedo. Not like that. Real, like Braj Bhakti, complete and utter, full samarpanam is very rare. So yoga then is a nice sort of, I would say it's the first stepping stone for Westerners, not just the asana, which is, without any yoga philosophy, asana is just keeping your body trim. Well, there's lots of ways of doing that. But I would say the philosophies of India have kind of piggybacked on it by means of the Yoga Sutras. And now I would say maybe this is just I'm making up a figure, but from all the people in the yoga studios are everywhere now. Yoga studios are every high street. But from, I would say barely 10% of people are interested in the philosophy. That's still many millions of people, my friends. Given that there's millions and millions, 10, 20 million in America doing something that they call yoga. So even if only 10% of those are interested in the philosophy, well, this is somehow or other, the yoga philosophy is entering into the West, and slowly you can see its effects. I mean, for example, belief in reincarnation is probably, I don't know, 30%. It wasn't that when I was a kid. If you believed in reincarnation, you think you're weird. Vegetarianism, when I was a kid, they'd force you to eat meat. You went to school, they'd send you to the doctor if you didn't eat meat. Now it's something like 12% of Europe are vegetarians, just in my own lifetime. So these things are spreading, and along with and the yoga philosophy is spreading. I think also the Gita is useful because it's about do your duty. The bhakti, I think it's still early days for that to take root. Even as many of us are trying, we're dedicating our lives to teaching these traditions. That will take some more time. It doesn't matter. It will take whatever time it needs to take. But in the meantime, yoga is an excellent vehicle, not just for Indian culture. Of course, Indian culture is a wonderful thing, music and so forth. But we're talking about ways of perceiving reality, deep contributions, not just dance and song, which of course are important for any culture, and cuisine. All these are, of course, India has very rich examples of all of these, but ways of seeing what is the point of life. Who am I? Who am I that will get cause me? Who is it? What? Why are we born? Why did I was born in one situation and not in another situation? What happens at death? Right? Remember the Kathopanishad. Nachiketas gets 3 wishes, and first one he says, okay, well, let my father not be angry at me, and the second one he wants to know some Vedic, the Vedic fire sacrifice that leads to Svarga, and the third one he says, well, death. What happens at death? Some say we exist, some say we do not. Who would be a better person to answer that question, Death, than you? Death doesn't want to answer. He tries to wriggle out. But these kinds of deep questions that everybody at some point, every human being. In fact, that's how the commentators, the first word in the Yoga Sutra, Atta Yoga Anusha. Well, Atta can just mean now in this sutra, but it can also mean Atta, now we have a human form. And everybody at some point, however much you try to run away from it with television or intoxication or social life, everybody at some point wakes up in the 3 o'clock in the morning and alone in bed and wonders, what's it all about? Why? The big questions, we call them big existential questions. Well, who am I? Why is there something and not nothing? What is it all about? What happens at death? So these real questions from the point of view of the yogis and the Vedantis, these are real questions. Everything else is just well and good, but it's all useless at the moment of death. Useless at the moment of death. What good is all these other chit chat and talk and all this words, so many words and philosophies and so forth and ideologies and politics and economics and all of that. It has some value, fine, to keep the world going, but no use at the moment of death, my friends. The sages advise us, pay attention. Krishna says, yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajate ante kalevaram tam evitaro jana. The moment of death is going to determine the next life. So these kinds of questions then, India has wonderful resources, many millennia of amazing beings who don't just ask philosophical questions sitting in an armchair, but they go to the forest and renounce everything and even their own minds. They chittavritti nirodha. That's how intense, that's how extreme the yogis go in their quest, not just to ask questions and come up with philosophical answers, but But let's just see how can we experience this. We can sit around and talk about it, and with Vedantins can debate about, is our Atman and Anutva, is it an individual, or will it merge into Brahma? I mean, you can sit around and talk about this all day. But for me, the wonderful thing about the Indian tradition is this great sadhu culture, tapas culture. Situated in the forest. It's always the forest, right? Think of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad right there, the forest Upanishad. And these great, not satisfied with just talking, because the mind can never, as Nyaya says, one philosopher will defeat another, not because the philosophy is better, just because the philosopher is more powerful, is smarter. So philosophy can never resolve anything. Has it ever? You never get truth from philosophy. So either truth is given to you, or the sages go to the forest and they engage in these amazing practices, chitta vritti nirodha. If they're jnanis, they seek the Atman, they seek their own svarupa, just like Patanjali says here, their own nature. And if you're a bhakta, you may do that too. But if you're a bhakta, you realize there must be something greater than I. There must be something that's not subject to Maya. Not subject to Maya, my friends. There must be something who, as Krishna says, Devihi yasha guna mayi mama Maya. There must be something that's controlling Maya. We are controlled by Maya. So how we can say we are Ishvara, how we can say we the ultimate. So therefore, some yogis go, they seek their Svarupa, they seek their own Atman, and Patanjali is one of those traditions. And others do that, but they keep going. They're actually interested in seeking Bhagavan. And then, of course, you have the Purana traditions, the great Puranas, the Shaiva, Vaishnava Puranas, which feature that. Then I don't think the West is ready to receive that. Of course, the Krishna movement is everywhere, but it's much harder for, I think, Westerners to. I'm not trying to generalize, there are many exceptions, but given the success of yoga, where there are tens of millions, and of course the yoga philosophy, which is hardly any bhakti. The Ishvara is there, but very kind of minimalistically there. The bhaktas would say this is not real bhakti. It's not real bhakti because it's not really about prema. It's not about prema. It's about svarupa. It's about realizing, your own ananda, as the Vedantas would say. But anyway, so here we are, and let's bring this round to you all. So many of you are students, and I think you should be proud of your traditions, not just proud in some asmita, ahankara, sort of foolish ego sort of way, but you should use your education and your training in these mostly Western traditions. Let's face it. Most education in India is Western-based. You're learning sciences, you're learning, biology and chemistry, engineering. These are Western knowledge. Of course, Indians may make great contribution, no one can deny, but they're ultimately coming from a yogi point of view, it's avidya. It's coming from ignoring the self and focusing on the world and the body and improving the world and improving the body and so forth, which is absolutely fine. But there is this whole other dimension, which for the rishis of India is the most important. Why? Because it's the only thing that can help you at death, my friends. Your engineering degree is not going to help you at death, nor is your knowledge of biology and physics and chemistry. You might get you a good job and a nice apartment in Mumbai, but your hair gets white, and then what? Then you retire, and then what? You sit in front of the television, and then what? Drink chai, and then what? At some point, you're going to be on deathbed. So where are your engineering degrees? How is that going to help you then? So therefore, I would hope that the youth of India not feel that their traditions are old-fashioned or somehow backward at all. Of course, there's a lot of dusting to do. There's lots of things that we no longer are useful to us, like caste and so forth. Yogis rejected caste anyway, and so did bhaktas. Right in the Gita, the caste is rejected. Krishna says anyone can attain param gatim. So my hope would be take these traditions seriously, and number one, and number two, create conversations between consciousness, in consciousness studies between the insight, the consciousness is not a material substance. Neurologists are still hoping they're going to find some neurological correlate for consciousness, where yoga is going to say, you keep looking, you never find it. For the simple reason that consciousness is not a neuron or a combination of neurons. So therefore, I would like to hope and envision an India, which, of course, it wants to be a great country. It deserves to be, but not just following blindly. Look at the way the rest of the world is going with all its pollution and environmental problems, and we're seeing the effect of that even this summer. If you're reading the newspapers, it's only going to increase. So I would hope that your young students, along with their study of the Western traditions, also give serious attention to studying, not just studying the Indian systems, but finding ways to create conversations. This is my parting comment. Finding ways to create conversations. In the ancient India, it's called the Purva Paksha, engaging the opposing point of view and creating discussions, as of course you're doing with this series of seminars. So I don't want to talk for too long. I think we want to have some time for questions, and of course, you have Shriman Murthy Ji here, who is gracefully, has some position in the government, and hopefully you'll be able to encourage more and more of your adhikaras, of your authorities, to see the support, support study of Indian philosophies and metaphysics in the universities, support conferences, support this sort of thing, bring in Western scholars, and try to sort of, and this is the real contribution, in my opinion, of India to world civilization, not just to run and try to be like Western culture. Well, that's inevitable now. The world has become enveloped by that. But from within that, India, these are the great gifts of India, and I hope, and many Westerners are following them. Many Westerners. So therefore, I hope you will see the value, and obviously you do, and that's why you're having this conference. So I'll leave off there. I don't want to talk too much, and I think we're supposed to have some time for questions. Correct? Soham Ji.
Yes, Professor Bryant, we would like to have some questions as well. Let me see if there were any questions in the box. You can also raise your hands. Yes, Mridul, you are having any questions?
Yes, sir.
I will just like to tell the participants here in WebEx, you can also raise your hands, or you can type in your question in the question answer box also. Okay, Mridul, please go ahead with your question.
Professor Bryant, my question is Rena, Pitra Rin, Matra Rin, a depth of parents or depth of society. So I wanted to ask, before going into spirituality or leaving the world like sannyasa, do one like sometimes it feels like there's a depth of parents, there's a depth of society. So the decision becomes it becomes difficult to decide whether to decide to give up the world for spiritual practice or continue serving your society or your parents.
Well,
So
Mridul, that's a great question, and of course, the sort of ideal Indian society is the Varnashram society, and then you have your brahmachari at 25 years, which I think is an excellent idea, because you see now that the students on campus are so distracted by by dating and by going out and socializing that it's very hard to focus on the studies. So if you had 25 years of real brahmachari, you would all be geniuses. If you focus, and I have some students like this, and they're amazing. They come from conservative Indian families, and they don't go to the student center. They study. They're very happy. They're very peaceful. They're not missing anything. and they are amazing. They're just brilliant. So the typical, better than I. Then 25 years you have your grihastha, and you used to then support your parents at that time. And then in the ideal system, and then when the kids are growing up, they take over, they're independent, or they take over the family business or the family, and then the couple then become yogis, the husband and wife, they in the vanaprastha, and they begin to focus on their spirituality from the age of 50 to 75. And then, of course, at the end, it sounds very, that you, of course, you separate because death is going to force you to separate anyway. And if you have an attachment, then of course you come straight back to samsara. So, but of course, there are texts which say only brahmanas do all four, the kshatriyas only do three. But the point is, to answer your question, most people you would you try to follow as best as possible in the modern world. But if you're interested in, in sort of a more traditional way of thinking about society and life and your own life and the stages of life, that's some kind of a model that, with a good student period of life and then a householder period, but there has to be at the end of it, presumably when your own parents die, that at the end of it, and there has to be this, at least before we die, some exclusive attention paid to your own spiritual development, both for your own sake of your own Atman, and also to be examples for the society. If you don't have the elders, if the elders are the gurus of the society, now there are always going to be those who feel, why should I go through all of that? Why should I go through all the hassle and the inconvenience and the problems of family life? Anyway, I have to end up and be alone. I'm gonna, at the end of it, I have to be like a full-time yogi. Well, why don't I be a full-time yogi right from the start? And so you do have a small percentage of maybe from past life practices. Maybe there are those who did a great yogic practice in the past, and they already in this life they have the samskaras. They see the futility of going through this whole system, and they become, and at an earlier age then they avoid all of the inconveniences and the obligations of the family life. So those, and we have great gurus who are examples of that, even in the modern period. So you have to decide where you fit best, where one fits best. One has to be honest. And there's nothing wrong with being a family person, provided, but even if there's a family person, you still have to do your religious practices, your meditations. It's not just going to happen magically at the end. You have to practice it during life, and then in the end, in the later part of life, you increase what you've already been practicing, become more exclusively focused on that. So if you're going to take the family path, which of course the vast majority of people will take, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's the Dharma. If you're going to take that path, you still have to have an hour or two in the morning that you dedicate to your study of the sacred texts and your meditational practice. There's plenty of examples still of that, but it's getting less and less and less, my friends. But in previous generations, of course, I'm sure your grandparents are much more that way inclined than, and of course the energy of modern India is pushing against that. Especially, I feel sorry for the young people and the universities, and everybody's dating and watching these Bollywood movies, and all the samskaras are going into the mind. You're watching all those Bollywood movies. It's all becoming a part of your chitta, my friends. That's how your chitta changes, and its goals change, and its understanding of the self change. Too much Bollywood is not a good thing. So if you want to be a yogi and a householder, you have to structure your lifestyle. Don't sit there watching television, all silly nonsense love movies. All of that goes into your head, and you are nothing other than the samskaras you feed into your mind. So even if you're going to be in the world with a family, you still, if you are interested in yoga, if you see the wisdom of yoga, you still have to structure your family life. There has to be tapas. And maybe turn off the television, don't read nonsense things. It's just going to agitate the mind. It's just going to make the mind rajasic, my friend. And the end of it all, you pay the price at the end of your life. You'll be clinging to your dead body. Your body's dying, and you'll be clinging. You'll have nothing in your mind. You'll have no practice in your mind that you can take shelter of, because you didn't do the practice in life. You think at the end of life you're going to start thinking of Bhagavan? I don't think so. You need to practice it in life, my friends. So for yourself, for the society to be a good example, don't worry about anybody else. You have your dharma. You have your dharma to the society to be an example, and to yourself, you have a duty to your own Atman. So be a family person by all means, but be a yogi. Be a yogi grihasta. Would be my answer to your question. Yes.
Thank
Great.
you, Professor Bryant. I have some hands here, hands up. So, Kumar, I would unmute you and you can ask your question.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Yeah, you are audible.
Oh, thank you.
You're audible. You're audible.
Thank you very much. I understand good karma begets good outcomes. That's what we've been taught from childhood. But what we are witnessing are people who practice bad karma but become presidents of powerful countries or very powerful. So where is the outcome based on bad karma? So there is a dichotomy here, and how do you explain that?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, the Christian theologians have always struggled over the century with the way they put the problem is, why do good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? I think we can maybe frame it that way as well. I'm sorry, what was your name, my friend?
Kumar.
Kumarji. You can't understand, you can't answer that question in a one-life model. It only makes sense in a multi-life model. So in a multi-life model, one has done a karma in a past life, and in this life, temporarily, for a period, even though that person is bad, is receiving some good fruits, which are the outcomes of good activities performed in a past life. Because if you say, well, in this life, this person did no good activities, then why is he getting good karma? Well, the only answer to that is from a past life. Remember, karma is not really a belief, it's a cause and effect model. It's actually a rational inference. Everything is cause and effect. Everything we know is cause and effect, cause and effect. Chemistry is, biology is, physics is, weather forecasting is. And so therefore, why should human behavior be a difference? Every action triggers a reaction. That's actually a rational, that's an inference that's reason-based. So specifically to your question then, if someone is bad and you're saying that, well, they're powerful politicians and that doesn't seem to be fair, well, the one way to answer that is that person in the past life did some pious, positive, maybe very good karma action, and now temporarily is enjoying it in this life, but it's temporary, Kumar. Sooner or later, that person, you may not witness it. It may be the crash, the fall will come in another life again, but that would be the answer. Everything is cause and effect, and if you can't find a cause in this life, then the cause must have been in the past life. And if you say that's well, that's just a belief. Well, then what? Then an answer to that would be, but everything we know is cause and effect. This is how you make an inference. An Indian inference, you say, well, there's fire on the mountain because there is smoke, and wherever there is smoke, there must be fire. So you make an inference. So wherever there is smoke, even if you don't see the fire, there must be fire as its cause. So that's an inference. So this is something that's shared by Buddhists and Jains and almost every ancient Indian thinker. Since everything we see is governed by cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, everything is an effect of a cause, and every cause creates an effect. Since all known reality is nothing, the Buddhists even go so far as to say reality is nothing other but a sequencing of cause and effect. And if that's true for the physical reality that we can empirically demonstrate, well, why should it not be true also for human behavior? And so therefore karma and reincarnation are outcomes of what I would call inferential thinking. Of course, it's also given, it's also, we find it in the sacred text, we find it in the Gita, we find it in the Upanishads, but you don't have to quote scripture to believe in karma. You can just extend the universal principle of cause and effect to human behavior. And if your birth is already in effect, why are people born in different circumstances? Why is one baby born with cognitive challenges or physical challenges and another isn't? So that's already in effect. Well, what were the causes for that? There must have been a previous life. And likewise, we're acting right until the moment of death. So we're doing causal activity right till the moment of death. When do those effects fit in? Well, the next life. So you can agree or disagree with this, and there may be one could present counter arguments, but we can say it is a philosophical, inferential, and I think very powerful model. And in that model, it may be the case that someone does good actions in the past life, or rather good actions in the past life, then in this life, because of free will, it becomes a bad person, but enjoys for a limited period, the period of good karma, powerful karma. You mentioned politicians, and I could tell from your voice that you obviously have something very specific in mind, and probably feel very strongly, and so do we all. Look at who we have in America, and can you imagine how dismayed we are with some of our politicians, just as you are with yours. So, but that would be an answer, Kumar. I don't know if you find that a satisfying answer or not, but it is an answer.
Yes, Professor Bryant, we must move on to, there are some other questions also. So I will request Raghudev to ask his question. I am unmuting him. So Raghudev, you can ask your question. Raghudev, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. So, Namaste, Professor. My
Namaste.
question is basically about the claims of Indologists. So, there is notion of two different Patanjalis. Some people believe that the author of Patanjali Yoga Sutra and the author of Mahabhashyakar is basically different. Two different peoples are there. So, what is truth behind these two different Patanjalis, and also what is the truth value of the claims regarding the influence of Buddhism and Jainism on some of the sutras of Patanjali?
Your name is Bhudev.
Raghudev.
Raghudev.
Yeah.
Raghudev, you'll never get an absolute. When you say what is the truth of the question, that you'll never get a definite answer. Some would say it's the same Patanjali, some say it's different. There's no way you can answer that question. There's no reason to doubt it. There's no reason to doubt it. As far as I'm concerned, tradition should be innocent unless proven guilty. So there's no reason to doubt the claim that the Patanjali of the Yoga Sutra is the same as the Patanjali of the Mahabhashya. That verse, there's a verse that actually says, Malam Sharirasya Chavaidyakena, that there is a Patanjali associated with Ayurveda. It's also possible, but we don't have any, and nothing has surfaced so far in the Shastra of Ayurveda written by Patanjali. But as to whether it's the same or not, no scholars have their different opinions, and that's what they do. Some will accept it. I myself see no reason to question it. Why not? Why can't Patanjali write a commentary on the Bhashya, on the Panini, and at the same time write a Yoga Sutra? There's no reason why not. I mean, you can compare the styles of the language, but you can't really, because the sutra style is very cryptic. So it doesn't so you can't compare the language of a bhashya with the language of a sutra, because by definition a sutra has to be minimalistic and a bhashya has to be expansive. So that's not a good approach but that's what I mean. How do you try to resolve a question like that? You look at the writing style, you look at the dates, so you and so forth. But I know that there are Indologists who accept it, or at least they don't reject it, and there's others that question it, and that's the nature of academe. That will never change. So that's chittavritti. You can chittavritti about that forever. You'll never get an absolute answer. If you're looking for the truth of the answer, you won't get the truth of the answer. You get opinion. And likewise with the influence of Buddhism and Jainism. I see no reason to think there is anything, any claims to Buddhist influence. You can construct a counter argument. And there's certainly good scholars that will see, for example, the Gita uses the word nirvana 3 times. Is that a sign of Buddhist influence? I don't think so. I think there were common vocabularies that everybody used: nirvana, moksha, kaivalya, and different, there weren't these hard divisions in earlier periods. And eventually nirvana becomes associated with Buddhism, and then the Vedic tradition stopped using it. But 3 times in the Gita, can you then say, as some scholars try to say, there's a Buddhist influence on the Gita just because nirvana is used 3 times? I certainly would not agree with that. It was an old term that was a collective usage. So likewise I think there's no reason. Maybe there was Jain and Buddhist. I mean, in the early period, you had yogis in the forest. I don't think they were strong. I mean, the Buddha was like a guru, and there were. I wonder whether there were the same strong boundaries as now. As in later times, you get the 6th school of Indian philosophies. I mean, where's that idea come from? Where does that idea come from? There's dozens and dozens. Where is Shaivism? Where is Kashmir Shaivism? Where's Shaiva Siddhanta? Where's so many things in the so-called 6 schools of philosophy? So these things are a later kind of, are later, I think, in my view, developments. It's possible that the Buddhist practitioners had made some contributions. And likewise, there was cross-fertilization, but you can never it's only going to be speculative about who's influencing who, which way is the direction going. It's always going to be speculative, and anyone that creates a strong position, you can always find ways to counter that, those kinds of claims. So this is the matter for critical scholarship, for academe. I don't think it should be of any interest to yogis. What does it matter who is influencing who?
Right.
If you're a serious yogi.
Right, sir. So there are 2 more questions are there. Parag Samuel, he has raised his hand. So I will unmute Parag. If you're there, you can ask your question.
I have been listening to you from the beginning. I have one question from Bhagavad Gita. It says that Swadharme Nidanam Shreyah Paradharma Bhayavah. In this context, what do you think should be the Swadharma of individual?
I'm sorry, what is the question? The sound is not clear.
Bhagavad Gita.
Paragji, your sound is not very clear. Perhaps you could write in the question and answer box. Paragji, your sound is not clear. I would request you to write your question in the Q&A box, and I will deliver it to Professor Bryant. Meanwhile, I will request Sunil, who has also raised his hand. So please, Sunil, you can ask your question.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, my question, Namaste, Professor. My question to the professor is, you have mentioned Kashmiri Shaivism. So I wanted to know Kashmiri Shaivism with its esoteric practices, the Kaula, Krama, Trika. How can it be correlated with, say, modern psychology and neurology? Because you also mentioned conduct a thorough Purva Paksha of contemporary trends. So basically, yeah, one line summation of my question is, how can we, draw a correlation between, say, esoteric practices of Abhinava Gupta 1,000 years ago with now? They have many modern elements, but they have many elements which are archaic to the present context. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Well, first of all, you remember that Kashmir Shaivism is going to be opposed by other schools, because for Kashmir Shaivism, has the idea everything is Chitti Shakti. There is no ultimate matter, and like Soham's name, actually, Soham, that your name Soham is coming from the Shaiva, the Kashmir Shaiva tradition. So I am that Shiva, Soham, and that's one of the mantras. So there are differences within the different schools, or some Vaishnava traditions are more dualistic, and Prakriti, Bhagavad Gita, Prakriti is matter. It is not Chitti Shakti. Kashmir Shaivism says it's Chitti Shakti. First of all, I would be careful about it. In these early days, I would, and if you're trying to create bridges with Western science, I wouldn't take the most extreme, or no, maybe that's the wrong word, but I would try to create bridges where the land is more appropriate for cross fertilization, and slowly, then you can go from there. So I mean, so the practices, first of all, we have to decide. You have to basically, the basic issue, the first issue is consciousness material or non-material? So I would just stick to that. That's a generic issue that is shared. The Vedanta will share with Kashmiri Shaivism, despite the fact that they would disagree. They would all agree that consciousness is a non-material tattva. It's not material. So I would focus attention on that sort of main point, especially given that Western science has failed to find consciousness in any neurological correlate. So I would be I would be involved in consciousness studies, getting up to date with the conversations about, what is consciousness, what are the different positions, what are the arguments being made, and I would just keep it very generic. I wouldn't start talking about Kashmir Shaivism or Vishishta Dvaita or any of these sort of more specific schools. I would take just a generic kind of pan-Indian, pan-yogic view of consciousness as not a material entity, and bring in the arguments and the resources of the various Indian schools, because they will all agree that much, at least they will agree that consciousness is not a material thing. Of course, in Kashmir Shaivism, it's a little different because there's no matter. Everything is Chitti Shakti, so that creates another kind of something else to consider. But I would focus on the main big issues at first, and once it's seen that Indian philosophy has contribution to make, and that Indian philosophy becomes more and more accepted in Western philosophical discussions and in conferences, and once people begin to develop respect for Indian philosophy on the big tickets, then we can start narrowing it down and thinking about, well, then you have to decide, well, which Indian, Kashmir Shaivism, first of all, has to respond to its critics across centuries in India itself. So it's so it's got its own Purva Pakshas in India, before even introducing it to Western Purva Pakshas. So I guess my answer would be, I would like to see the Indian philosophical traditions making a contribution to consciousness study, just consciousness as something distinct from other tattvas, from matter, and keep it generic. It's early days, and then see where the conversations go after that.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Bryant, for that answer.
Can you give him a chance to respond to that?
Sorry?
Would you like to give that gentleman a chance to respond to that?
I think he has not raised his hand, so probably he doesn't have any counter questions to this. So I will.
What was his name? Kumar?
Yeah, you wanted. Kumar has raised his hand, so I can unmute Kumar. And if he has a follow-up question to Professor Bryant, he can do that. I was thinking about the last person. Sorry.
I was thinking of the last person too, but if anybody wants to reply, let them have a chance. No, otherwise it's not fair.
Yeah, sure. Kumar, you are unmuted. So you can ask your question. Even Parag has a follow-up question, I think.
Thank you very much. This is a different question, and I'm trying to understand the meaning of para shakti, the energy. Is para shakti the same as dark energy, which constitutes roughly about 70% of the universe? Or is it something different when they say para shakti?
That's another question we can never answer, my friend. Parashakti, first of all, Parashakti is Chitti Shakti. It's consciousness. And there's no reason at this point to consider that the dark matter it could be, but you'd have to find reasons to suppose it is. So if you want to make a comparison between Parashakti and dark energy, you have to have grounds to do that. And Parashakti is a type of Shakti. It's consciousness. It's Chitti Shakti. It's an expression, a higher expression of Chitti Shakti. I'm not an expert on Kashmir Shaivism. My own tradition is Vaishnav, but so I'm more familiar with Vedanta and the six schools. But you would have to then have reason to suppose. And there is in philosophy departments, there is this idea that at the root of reality, there's mind stuff, that there is intelligence. So there are scholars, panpsychism, for example, is making a bit of a comeback. I don't know enough about it to represent it, but panpsychism, pan means everywhere, psychism means mind. So like this notion of universal mind. So what I would encourage you to do is find conversations already taking place. Maybe they begin on the margins. It doesn't matter. But they may grow, they may dwindle away. But find conversations that are saying something at least somewhat similar to what some of the Indian traditions are saying. In your case, the idea of Parashakti, and then see if you can find ways of bringing, for example, panpsychism into some kind of a dialogue with the notion of Parashakti. But your question is specifically on dark matter, and I don't know of anyone that's suggesting that it is conscious. And why would you, on what grounds would you make a case that it was? You'd have to find grounds to suggest that dark matter or dark energy somehow is conscious. If you could find grounds to suppose that, if you find maybe some small, even if they're marginal, if you find scientists saying something like that, then you can create a conversation.
Well, thank you for your answer. I think, Kumar, you don't have any follow-up question to that. Parag has a follow-up question, and I will take that. And one more question is there in the Q&A box. So with these two questions, we will try to end the session for the interest of time. So Parag, you can ask your question.
Could I just say one thing? These are wonderful questions, wonderful conversations, but my friends, whatever we do, we have to do it with rigor and integrity. When we try to bring these things into obviously into science and Indian religion together, we can't just it can't be randomly done. Then it will be rejected. If it's randomly done, if it's not done with philosophical, intellectual rigor, it will be ignored, and people will say, "Oh, Indian philosophy is just, there's no philosophy there." So whatever conversations you make, whatever kind of channels you wish to pursue, do it with integrity and rigor, because otherwise you will not be taken seriously, and you will do a disservice.
Parag, you can ask your question.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Earlier, I could not hear my answer to my question, so I repeat my question. In Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned, Swadharme Nidanam Shreya Paradharma Bhayavaha. In this context, what should be one's individual dharma to pursue it as a Swadharma?
Parag, it was so much easier in ancient times. Even in Europe, people just follow this dharma of the jati, And they, if you, even in the West, your father was a farmer, you were a farmer, your father was a military man. So Krishna says, better you die in your own dharma, because the dharma of another is bhayankara. But then you're asking, well, how do you know what your swadharma is? It's not an easy question. And the problem is, now in the modern world, we have so many choices. You go to university and you have I see kids here, and they're 24 years old. They finish their degree. They don't have a clue what they want to do with their lives. So there's no easy answer. Again, in the ancient India and the ancient world, everywhere for that matter, most people, maybe 90%, I don't have a number, but the vast majority of people all over the world followed the dharma of their family. That's no longer the world in which we live in. So I would say this. So I don't have any shastra. Krishna says, Chaturvarna mayashristam guna karma vibhagasaha. So he gives a little bit of a little bit of a help. He says your dharma is according to your gunas, according to your nature. If you have a lot of rajas, then your dharma will be a more activism or a more rajasic type of activity. If you're more tamasic, you might prefer something that's less ambitious, more focused, more a skill with the hands, or a car, or so chatur. So guna, it's according to your gunas, your very nature. So I would, when people ask me this question in the West, Westerners are interested in this as well. They're looking for meaning in their life. What should they do with their life? They're interested in yoga philosophy. They don't want to go to the forest. They don't want to, renounce everything. They want to be yogis and do some yoga, but they want to have a family and find a career. And they're looking for, how do I find my career? And what can you say? Examine your own nature. We all have dispositions, even though the nature is changing. Krishna says in the Gita, the gunas are always competing, but we come with certain karma from the past life. We come with a certain disposition. We come with a certain body type, and use viveka and try to, and here's a tip. Try to, and this is what I tell everybody, it's just me, it's not Krishna or Patanjali, it's just little old me. But my tip would be this: pay attention to what you've always wanted to do, even as a child. Maybe as a child, you had a nature to, I don't know, help others, or you had a business. You would exchange your candy and try and get 2 bits of candy back. What kind of a nature did, because your guna is going to be, even though it can change, and Krishna urges us to change it and become more nitya sattva sto, become more sattvic, we nonetheless have a dominant type of guna personality, which lends itself. And then and if the question is, well, how do I know what it is? Look back on your life and try to see, what is it that you always wanted to do, or you always felt you could do, or you should do, or like one day you'd like to do, because that may be your gunas and karmas, but it has to be something that was always there, because we all get great ideas and they last 2 weeks and they disappear, and another great idea, 2 weeks and disappear. That's not clearly not your guna, clearly not your dharma. So it has to be something that has sort of always been there, even maybe from childhood. Your musical interest, or maybe you're an activist. You don't like to see kids bullied in the playground, and you always felt like, I want to protect people. I want to defend you. Maybe political activism, and that sort of thing. Or teaching. You have an inclination to books, and so then so try to. There's no easy answer. I'm not saying there is an easy answer to that. But your own guna, of course, your own karma is going to determine that. And what doors open for you? We are limited by our karma. What kinds of opportunities present themselves to us? So Krishna says those two things. Chaturvarnam maya shristam. The Chaturvarna means your dharma. What is your dharma, right? Chaturvarnam is nothing other than a combination of different dharmas at different stages of life and professional dharmas. How did Krishna create them? Guna karma. According to your disposition, the particular configuration of the gunas that are that represent you as an individual in this life, distinctive, they lend themselves, those gunas lend themselves, that when you do something, it's kind of effortless. And it may not bring you money. It may not bring you a success in the world, but you feel you feel kind of organically at ease with yourself and your placement in the world. The problem is there's so much pressure put on kids to make money and to do these careers, like, you know, these standard careers, right? Engineer, lawyer, you know, and there's pressure on the kids that, you know, make the family happy. They have to sort of fill into one of these slots, and maybe they don't have the guna or the guna for that, and so they're miserable. So a good parent should never put that kind of pressure on the children. But, you know, find what is your guna. Doesn't matter if you're going to be poor. Better to be poor and happy than miserable and successful. So there's no easy answer to the question other than examine yourself, and not just now, but what is it you've always wanted to do, because guna is going to be relatively consistent throughout your life. And then karma, what kind of opportunities present themselves for you to accommodate whatever that gunic disposition is. So two things, guna, karma, right there in the Gita.
Professor Bryant, if I would like to add on to something in this regard, which is my own personal thought actually. So I think that the Chaturashram Pratha that was there was preparing the brahmacharis to understand their swadharma during the first period of their life. So doing their meditation practices and their studies, getting acquainted with different types of knowledge which is out there, different types of skills which are out there, as well as practicing meditation and dhyana, they could go into and be close to their real self and get attuned to which particular knowledge or which particular skills they feel their natural inclination towards. And that could decide the profession that they would take up during their Garhastha Jivan. So would you could you give some comment or your own insights in this?
Well, Soham, I think it's a very interesting idea. I think it may work very well for our modern day. But if you're talking about tradition, then you have to, if you want to give an interpretation of something, then you have to find a shastric, you have to bring the shastra in to indicate that that's the way it was in ancient India. You have to bring in pramana, it's called pramana. You have to bring in evidence that this is the way it was. But when we look at the varnashram system, we don't see it like that. The Brahmin children, they became Brahmins. The Kshatriya children became Kshatriyas. The Vaishya children became Vaishyas. The Sudra children became. So the brahmachari was, at the ancient times, was not so much to figure out who you were and, okay, now I'm going to be a Vaishya, or now I'm going to know. It was very much more jati based. However, I think your idea, so I don't think your idea represents the state of affairs in the pre-modern period, but I think it has great value, Soham, for the present. I think now, where we don't have these strong jati bonds, we don't have this impulse that you have to do what your parents do. The society doesn't express, it may be in rural India, but not so much it's changing. So I think your idea has great value for modern India, but I would be careful about saying that that's the way it was in pre-modern India, because we don't see any evidence of that. And if you wish to make a case that that's what, you have to provide some shastra. You have to show how but I think it's great value for your younger generation now. There's no pressure on them to follow the jati, and they should exactly do what you say. I think it's a great idea. Brahmachari, do their practices, and then try to get some viveka, some clear insight into the nature of their gunas. So I would very much support that idea. My only caveat would be, I wouldn't say that that's a historical way it was, but certainly of value to the modern world.
Right, sir. And if we are not in going about proclaiming that it was the same way in the past, but just take up this idea and try to present it suiting to the modern perspective. So is there any way in which this sort of a study or this sort of a research oriented or idea can be presented to the world to take up some tradition which was there for, which was mentioned in the traditions, and present it with a modern in the modern framework in the modern day. So this sort of studies are going on or not, according to you, as per your knowledge, since we are not familiar with this sort of studies.
Well, I mean, any kind of study like that would be going on in India. It's not going on in the West. So you know that's something that I would, you know, that the sort of one would hope to find in India, or at least in the future. Soham, I think you'd need to make a case. You'd need to say, look, the old ways are no longer feasible because the jati system is breaking down. So the jati system is now discouraged and frowned upon, even in marriage and so forth. So we're now in a modern period where, you know, still obviously jati consciousness is there, but nothing like it used to be. So we now have a new situation where the ancients didn't face this situation, and so you have to make a case. So therefore, we have to use art because the Shastra has always progressed along with the time. I mean, if you read the Vedic culture, it's very, very different from the Upanishadic culture, very different from the Puranic culture, very different from medieval culture. So the Indian tradition has always kind of flown and adapted. It hasn't changed the core. Atman Bhagavan, that's the core. But things like Varnashram, these are surface things. So I would advise you. I think it's a very good idea. I would advise you to think about it. I would advise you to maybe start writing something, and I would present it as saying, well, the old jati system and the old dharma suit, you know, the varnashram system is no longer really. It's no longer, you know, there for the young, you know, for our young people educated in Western style university education system. So clearly, that's no longer relevant. But we can still use our ancient philosophy, and we can sort of adjust it to a non-jati system, and along the ways you suggested, we can, you know, encourage the sort of brahmacharya period of life in order for students to, you know, to have some freedom from, you know, sexual urges and dating and socializing with the opposite sex and all the social life that goes on in college campuses. Sort of encourage, you know, there's plenty of conservative. There are, you know, there's a sort of a conservative element in America in college campuses that's making quite a comeback. So if it can take place in a society like America, there's no reason why conservatism can't become acceptable to a certain component of Indian youth, and you can then present brahmacharya as an opportunity in the way you just suggested. You can make a case for that, and the reason you're doing that is because you have to do that. And why do you have to do that? Because the jati system has broken down. So therefore, if the old system doesn't work, then it is the job of whoever the modern Hindus are, the modern perpetuators of Indian culture are. It's their dharma to adjust things, not the core things, not the Atman related things, not the Bhagavan related things, not the yoga related things, but to adjust the sort of superficial, you know, job, profession type things to be relevant to the present day and age.
Right, Professor. In the interest of time, I think we should stop our discussion and question answer now. But as I promised, there was one question in the Q&A box that I would pose to Professor Bryant. Here, Vidya Surendranji has asked a question, and perhaps it is one question that many of us are having in our minds. She is saying, "Thank you, Edwin Ji. May we know what drew you to Sanatan Dharma? How has it changed your life and way of thinking? Thank you so much for this wonderful session." So this is her question.
Well, I was a young man. I went to India in the late 70s, and I'd always had a fascination with India. I probably had some samskaras from my past life because they were very strong, and I didn't really know anything about India or yoga philosophy, but I had a very, very, very strong impulse and in my teens to go to India, and I did back then in the late 70s. It was very different than most of you probably not born at that time, and And I think I became sadhu for a few years and immersed myself completely in the practices and the study. And then when I couldn't do that anymore for various reasons, I created a career for myself where I could continue to study and to teach and to do the practices. So if the question is what attracted me, well, the depth of the wisdom. I was also very much attracted to bhakti, and I somehow or other stumbled into Vrindavan inadvertently. I didn't know anything about it, and then my heart became captured by little Gopal, Braj Gopal, and that's something that's trans-rational. That's not something that there is a rational explanation for. That's the nature of bhakti. It goes beyond reason. Actually, all the great rationalists of India, they were all bhaktas of something or other. So there's this whole other element that I think it's a bit early days in the West yet for that. But to answer your question, I became enamored by little Gopal, and I gave my heart to him, and that's that. Well, I don't know what else to say.
Okay, thank you, Professor Bryant, for this wonderful session. And we have to make a closure now. But I would like to invite Professor Anil Kumar Gaurishetty. He would like to address the gathering and talk about some of the activities that IKS committee here at IIT Roorkee are doing, so that all of us are aware of the various activities and opportunities that they might also have to get part with. Anilji, over to you.
Thank you, Soham Mahoday. So already 2 hours are over, but let me take this opportunity to provide some important information from IIT Roorkee, which are happening in terms of IKS. In the month of August, from 25th to 27th, as part of G20 University Connect program, IIT Roorkee is organizing National Youth Conference on Indian Knowledge Systems. The website link I have provided in the chat box, and the last day to submit the abstracts is 31st of July. The themes and many other details are available in the website, and 31st July is the deadline. And even though if you have nothing to present in the conference in terms of poster or oral, you are most welcome to participate in the conference and participate in the discussions which happens in the conference. So please be there and encourage us to carry out more IKS activities in terms of academics and research. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I would like to add here that we have wonderful keynote speakers in the conference. So you can just check out our website. And if you feel interested, please do come over to IIT Roorkee during that time. We will be happy to host you. And I would like to just note that Professor Murthy was there throughout your lecture. He had to leave during the last few questions, and he has just conveyed his thanks to you, Professor Bryant, for your wonderful lecture in the chat box. Now I would like to officially end the session and would like to call upon Vishendra Singh Puniaji, who is also a member of our IKS committee, and to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you, Vishendraji, for being here. Please go ahead.
And I hope I am audible to all of you.
And you can be a bit louder, maybe.
Yeah. So on behalf of IKS Committee, IIT Roorkee, I express my deepest thanks to Professor Edwin Bryant for this very insightful session. Actually, I have attended many sessions on these topics, but this is, I would say, this was one of the best. And in addition to on my personal capacity as well as on behalf of IKS Committee, I would request Professor Edwin Bryant to visit our campus as well whenever he gets time. Also, since we are starting a center on IKS, Indic knowledge systems, various domains in IKS, we would also, if your bandwidth allows, we would also invite you to formally get associated with our center as well. And we are really thankful because you could manage time despite this huge time difference between us and New Jersey. In addition to Professor Edwin Bryant, we also express our deepest thanks to the audience. Our registration for this lecture series have crossed 1,300, and all of the participants may not be able to join all the lectures, but still the outreach has been extremely wonderful. We also thank Professor K.K. Pant, who is Director IIT Roorkee, our Dean of Academic Affairs, Professor Apurva Sharma. And we also would like to thank Professor Ganti Murthy, who is the National Coordinator of IKS Division, for supporting the IKS initiative at IIT Roorkee. I thank Professor Anil Gaurishetty for leading all, for managing everything about IKS at IIT Roorkee, and Sohamji for coordinating all the lecture series. And last but not the least, I thank the student team, especially Mridul, Shruti, Raghudev, Rohan, and Anjalika, among many others, to manage everything. And thank you, Professor Edwin, again for this wonderful session. We would definitely request your presence at our campus. Namaskar.
Namaskar ji.
Namaste.
We will end the session with Shanti Mantra for all. Anjalika, please do the Shanti Mantra. Anjalika?
Sir, I'm audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Please turn on your video.
So, सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति